Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hi guys, welcome back. Hopefully you caught our episode last week on special education when Kayla broke down what it is and who qualifies for those services. Today we're going to start a conversation about dyslexia, and we're going to be talking with an expert on dyslexia. She is a special education teacher at Horizons Academy. Her name is Alana Williams, and she is going to talk to us about what dyslexia is, what to be looking for as parents, and what the behaviors may present, what the difficulties are, and how to support our students or kids with dyslexia. Okay, Alana, we are so excited to have you here with us today to talk about dyslexia. So let's get started with what is a learning disability? What do we need to know about that?
First of all, thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. So a learning disability is a type of disability that affects a person's academic achievement and their ability to learn in certain areas.
Yeah, so they can be trouble processing words or numbers. There's a lot of different ones, writing, reading, spelling. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. And I think something important to remember is that learning disabilities can be genetic and kind of run in families, right? So there's oftentimes somebody, it may not be a parent, it could be an uncle or an aunt or grandparent, right? Somebody who's maybe not right in that nuclear family who can also be having a learning disability. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of times, grown up in the family might not even know they have a learning disability. They might have just struggled in school. And then once, the child is identified as having a learning disability, the parent or, the other family members like, wait, I think I actually have that too. And they might even get tested and realize that they do indeed have that.
Oh my gosh. Yes. That happens actually more frequently than I think people realize is by identifying it. We're doing better at identifying learning differences now. And something I wanted to say, it's not right in terms of like we said, what is a learning disability, but it's not about being stupid or lazy. And I think sometimes people mistake that learning difference as something about their IQ, but really people who have dyslexia or dysgraphia or dyscalculia or any learning difference, they actually have high or average intelligence, right? So they're definitely keeping up to their peers in terms of their intelligence ability.
Yes. And I think that's also what really makes a student stick out, is that you're like, why is this kid not able to read? Or why is this kid really struggling with math? They are super smart. They are, able to achieve as much as their peers or more than their peers, but there's something missing. There's a link missing.
Yeah. It just doesn't feel quite right. Yeah, absolutely. So we're here to talk about dyslexia today. So tell me, what is dyslexia? What do we need to know about what dyslexia is?
So dyslexia is a specific type of learning disability, and it really affects a person's ability to read, spell, write, and it can also affect, their ability to learn math as well. And like you said, it is really not an intellectual issue at all. There is just something going on in their brain that is disrupting their ability to read, right? And to have phonological awareness, which is that connection between letters and sounds, which is the ultimate foundation of reading and writing. So they really just need to work on rewiring their brain and learning a different way to build those connections between letters and sounds.
Yeah. So it's not, I think everybody hears dyslexia and thinks that it's just this like inversion or switching of letters. It's not that simple. It's a little bit more complex in the brain. Is that right?
Yes, definitely. And that can happen. And I think that students, often will see the first letter of a word, and they'll read it completely differently just because they see a first letter and they think it's something else. And sometimes they do mix around those letters and those sounds, but really the foundation is that they're not connecting, that B says B, or that C can say K and S, depending on where it comes in a word and what letters are following it. So there really is some sort of foundational issue that needs to be, targeted, and then they can read using that skill later on.
Yeah, very cool. So how do we get diagnosed with dyslexia, or how does that process happen?
So there are a few different ways to get a diagnosis. So one way is through like comprehensive educational testing, which is usually administered by a psychologist who specializes in psychoeducational testing. So that would be the kind of testing that a parent seeks out, like a private evaluation. So if you're going to a school that's specifically for kids with learning disabilities, the school might require you to get this kind of testing. And it usually comes with like a whole cognitive, measure too. The other type of testing you can get that's done by like a speech and language pathologist is a comprehensive language testing. And that doesn't always include cognitive measures. So you won't be able to get a student's IQ from that. But you will be able to see where their deficits are with phonological awareness, right? Between that letter and sound correspondence.
Yeah.
Again, that would be a private evaluation that parents can seek. But a traditional school setting, like a public school, might offer testing as well. So usually students who are in public school, they kind of have like a 3-tier response. So tier 1 is just like typical classroom instruction. And then if the teacher notices that the kid is struggling with learning to read, they move to tier 2, which is like targeted intervention in a small group. And then if the student is still struggling, they move to tier 3, which is highly, targeted individualized intervention, excuse me. And then if the student is still struggling after tier 2 and tier 3, then the public school system might, initiate that evaluation, and they are looking for something called a specific learning disability. They won't actually use the term dyslexia. Mm-hmm. It's just not in the definition that IDEA provides. And parents can also make a written request for the public school to evaluate their student, or their child. And that public school evaluation is free for parents. But sometimes parents do prefer to seek a private evaluation. It can be more comprehensive than the public school evaluation. And sometimes you might feel like it's less biased than the public school evaluation.
Yeah. So very good information about getting diagnosed. Okay. So what behaviors or symptoms might parents see that might, lead them to think about their kid? Maybe they have dyslexia. So what are they looking for?
Yeah. There are tons of behaviors, that can emerge around dyslexia. So the first, can be with the physical act of reading, right? Difficulty remembering the letter names and the sounds, or matching the letter names and the sounds. If your child is struggling to rhyme or manipulate the different sounds of language, changing, the B in bat to a C to make it say cat. That can be really difficult for students with dyslexia. But also, poor behavior in the classroom, being the class clown can be a really, big indicator. At my school, at Horizon Academy, we always say every behavior has a source. And a child, they're acting out for a reason, and it's up to the teacher or, a parent to figure out what that reason is. So if your child is feeling lost in the classroom, if they're feeling confused, if they're feeling overwhelmed, they're going to use some sort of other outlet to let you know. That often comes as acting out, and is just like a red flag that there's something going on. We need to look into that. Reading comprehension, so understanding what the student is reading, can be really difficult, because if they can't read the words, then they can't understand what they're reading. But like we said, how it's not intellectual disability, they're listening comprehension. So when they're listening and being read to them, they understand completely what the story is saying. So that could be a big indicator. Also, if you are reading a book with your kid, and you've read the book multiple times, you might feel like, wow, they can really read this book, but they might just be memorizing the words. They might be remembering what you're saying and then reading it back without really paying attention to the words. Mm-hmm. So if you try a book that's on the same level, has similar words, right? Nothing that the words are not much longer or much more complicated than the book that you're reading, but they can't read the book without you reading it to them first. That could be a big indicator that, they might have dyslexia.
Yeah.
And also dyslexia doesn't just present, it doesn't present in one way. So it also goes hand in hand with other learning disabilities. So if your child has ADHD, they might have dyslexia. If your child has dysgraphia or dyscalculia, they might have dyslexia, right? These all come together typically. And working memory, right? Holding information in your mind and then using it. and processing speed. So how quickly you're able to understand what someone is saying to you. Those can also play a factor in dyslexia too, because if your working memory is kind of low and your processing speed is slower, it's going to be harder for you to build those letter sound connections and then to remember that a certain letter makes a certain sound. And while you're remembering that, apply it in a word also. So knowing that the A in cat says ah, and remembering to say ah, that can be really difficult too. So those are all different, symptoms or right behaviors that might lead you to saying, hey, maybe my child has dyslexia. I should get them tested.
Yeah. Well, and it doesn't look the same for every student. So what brings them to the table can be different. And I find that sometimes kids also feel like they're dumb, right? So they might be doing super well in math, right? And so you're like, wow, you're exceptional at math or doing perfectly great at math. Maybe they're not above average, but they're doing great in math. But then when it comes to spelling or writing, they give up easily or they don't want to read. They say they hate reading. And really reading is power. So we should want to read. Right? Because reading opens this door to all this information. And so kids should want to read. And so when they don't want to read as parents, we should question why? Why is that happening? Because it would open all these doors for them. And if they're not wanting to do that, there's probably something that's getting in their way. And so we should get curious about what that is. Okay. So then a question that I often get about dyslexia is, does it last forever and can you cure it?
Yes. So, dyslexia does last forever. And it is not something that can be cured, but with early intervention, and intensive intervention, your brain can actually learn to work differently. Our brains are super flexible. So by teaching a child to read in a certain way that is good, right for them, if they have dyslexia, you're actually building new connections, new neural pathways in their brain. That's going to help them develop to be a skilled reader. But the earlier the intervention, the better it is because, they haven't really made those neural connections yet. And we can rewire their brain. And then the more you rewire it and take a different pathway, the stronger it is. One of the school psychologists at the school that I used to work at, he really described it like the way that we typically read, if you have dyslexia, there is a traffic jam in your brain. And he would tell the kids, we are actually just constructing a new road. A new highway for you to take. But constructing a new road takes a really long time. Think about how when you're driving on the road, the construction workers are always there working. It feels like it takes forever. So he's like, it takes a while to build that new road, but that is what you're doing. And it's important to build that road so that soon, when it's all built, you can drive smoothly, you can read, smoothly.
That's amazing, right? Because I think, kids, even learning the new skills can be frustrated by that part, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about, the Orton Gillingham method or approach, excuse me. So the Orton Gillingham approach. So it is a special approach that you guys use at Horizons Academy, which is the school that you work for. And it is kind of the gold standard, right? So what is it and why do we use it? Why does it work?
Yes. Okay. So the Orton Gillingham approach is actually really cool. It was developed by a doctor named Samuel Orton and a teacher named Anna Gillingham. And so he was studying how dyslexia affects the brain. And Anna was a teacher and she applied this knowledge to her work with struggling students and it worked. So what's really awesome about the approach is that it engages a kid's visual, auditory, kinesthetic, right, and tactile senses, paired with explicit instruction. So there is nothing for the student to discover by themselves. We do help them. It's kind of a guided discovery. So you're going to read a set of words and you're going to say, what do these words have in common? That's kind of the first introduction because you want the students to make the discovery themselves. But then we are explicitly practicing the sound that they're learning. They're tracing the sound with their fingers. They're tapping on their arm. They might be using a carpet square or sand or whipped cream or shaving cream. I'm really getting that tactile because your muscle memory is really important and you really want to engage all of your senses to really help your body and your brain learn. And OG practitioners, they're diagnostic and they're prescriptive. So this means that they're using a student's errors to inform their instruction. So whatever errors you're making today, the teacher's looking at it and being like, okay, I see that this kid's struggling with XYZ. We're going to come back to this tomorrow and continue working on it. And it is a cycle. I mean, you are constantly repeating what you're learning because repetition is crucial, right? For making that your skills automatic. And the more automatic your basic skills are, so the better you are at knowing that B says B, then your brain can kind of relieve that, right? And learn harder skills and complete more complex tasks. And so Orton Gillingham, it's an approach because it's really based on 6 principles that are all like, being sequential and cumulative. So building on itself, being multisensory, looking at words as a whole, but then breaking them down into their different parts and vice versa. So there's a lot that is involved in a lesson. And the lesson moves very quickly. It's like 5-minute segments, but that's because we were trying to, continually keep the brain moving and building those neural connections.
Yeah. I mean, and I know personally that it works so well because I have a son who has dyslexia, and this program and Horizons have been critical in helping him to overcome dyslexia. So I can say as a mom, it works. And as a practitioner, I am certainly not afraid to help my families advocate for the Orton Gillingham approach. Okay, so let's talk about what parents can do to support their kids. So let's say that they think that their kid has dyslexia, or maybe they have a diagnosis, but what can they do to support their kid with dyslexia?
So I think that reading with your kid is really important. I think that working on those letter sound correspondences are really important. And also, I mean, like you said, kids they want to learn. And so we want to build up that love of learning. I think that when you have dyslexia, it is really, really hard for you and you lose that love of learning. So I think that the more that we can build that up, the better it is. I also think that, if it makes sense for your family going to a school that's, a specialized school like Horizon Academy, right? That is a school that is meant for kids with dyslexia and other learning disabilities can be, really important and really instrumental in building up not only your students' love for learning, but their confidence, right? And their love for themselves. A lot of parents who bring their kids to Horizon Academy, they end up saying like that they have their child back, that they lost their child along the way. And now that their child feels more successful, they have their child back. And so I think it's also important to tell your child that it's okay that you're struggling. We're going to work on this together. And I think that, if you haven't gotten your child tested for dyslexia and you notice that they're struggling, I think getting your kid tested is super important because there are so many accommodations for people with dyslexia, whether you are going to a specialized school or not. You really want your student to have those accommodations in place so that they can feel successful and be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also building them up, right? Like some kids are great at other things besides reading. And before we have the diagnosis, if that's what ends up happening, like supporting your kid, if they're really great at athletic things, like supporting that. If they're really great at math, supporting that. So like building your kids' confidence up is really important, and believing in them. And I think sometimes as a parent, we want our kids to just like get it, right? And so we are like, here, just do this over and over and over again. But sometimes we need to get them a tutor or get breaks, right? So sometimes the school intervention, if we have a diagnosis of dyslexia, is enough, but sometimes it's not. And so we have to seek outside intervention. So you mentioned Horizon Academy and it being a specialized school for kids with learning differences. Talk to me about why would a parent pick a school like Horizons for their kiddo with a learning difference?
Well, I think that there are a few different reasons you would, choose to send your kid to a school like Horizon Academy. I think that if your kid is really struggling and the interventions at school are not working, or tutoring is not enough, or we actually tutor at Horizon Academy after school. And sometimes as a tutor, you will be like, you know what, this student would actually do better spending the day here. They need more intensive instruction that we can, support or give in these 45 minutes. And sometimes tutoring is enough, 100%. So I think it depends. Is your child struggling more and is the intervention effective or is it not? I feel like also parents will end up deciding to send their school or child to a school like Horizon Academy if the school that they're at isn't doing enough. Do you know that your kid is struggling, but the teacher's telling you everything's okay and the school's telling you everything's okay? Does something feel off to you? Then that's when I think that you'll take the next step and be like, I need to get my kid out of this environment because I can tell something's wrong and this isn't working.
Yeah, we're not making enough progress.
Exactly.
Fast enough, right? Like we've been at this for a while and everybody seems to be okay with it, but you're like, we're not catching up. Like this just is not enough intervention.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Like you said, right? You need to build your child up. Dyslexia does not define your child. There's so much more to your child than being dyslexic. And so if your kid is feeling unsuccessful and just so down and needs a change, I think that coming to a school like Horizon Academy is just absolutely life-changing. To be in a school like where your child can feel safe and feel heard and feel smart, that is going to change the way that they view themselves. And that's going to set them up to feel, really good and, be successful.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, so I was going to ask you, what do you want to end with letting parents know? And I think you covered those of like knowing that your kid is smart, building your kid up, knowing that they're more than their diagnosis. Is there anything else that you want parents to lead with?
If you are noticing that your child is struggling, I would, seek professional assessment early and get early intervention, because the earlier intervention is going to be better for your child. It's going to help rewire their brain, when they're younger. And also, as the older a child gets, and if there's later intervention, that is also when more like associated issues develop, like a lower, poor self-esteem, which we've been talking about building up your child. The longer you're waiting to help them get the help that they need, the worse that they might feel about themselves, the poorer the behavior that you're going to see. And so getting that testing done and getting intervention done at a young age is going to be really, really important. And just like we said before, dyslexia is not an intellectual issue. It does not mean that your kid is stupid. It does not mean that your kid is lazy. They are actually probably putting in way more work than any other kid in that classroom, and they're still struggling. And how frustrating is it that you're putting in all this work and someone thinks that you're being lazy? Wouldn't you act out?
Yeah,
I mean, it all makes sense.
Thank you, Alana, again for your time today. I want to end with some takeaways for what we learned today. I think the first is that kids with dyslexia can be great readers, that if they have early intervention, they can learn skills to be fantastic readers. There's also more to humans and children than just being able to read. And so I think it's important that we don't allow our child's diagnosis or potential diagnosis to define them. I think as a parent, it's critical for us to be a support towards our kids, to believe in them and encourage them. I think also we need to consider that if our school that our child's in is not providing enough resources, please seek out other sources. Believe your gut, trust yourself, and seek out those additional resources. If you like what we're doing, if you've enjoyed our show, please like and subscribe to us, share us with your friends, and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. If you would like to send a topic request or you have a question, please email us at accidentalexperts@gmail.com. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope you have a wonderful day. We'll talk to you next week when we are talking about autism, what it is, how to identify it, and how to understand if your kid might have autism. Have a great day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.